All right, you accursed. Let's get this hobbled pod underway. We're down a panelist today. It's like missing a limb. Scott Reid is out today. As I speak these words early on a Monday morning, his son Sam is competing in a basketball tournament, and in my head, I'm imagining Scott is cheering loudly from the bleachers with his best Jean Chrétien voice. Good luck, Sam. Curse of Politics, good karma is coming your way from all three of us. That's me, David Herle, Kory Teneycke in his upscale Sandinista uniform today, and Jordan Leichnitz in Ottawa. Here's the rundown today. We're going to start with our cursed clipping because it's a full analysis of yesterday's published Abacus data poll. Conservatives lead by 17 points over the Liberals. 17. Liberals at 24. Conservatives are 22 points clear of the NDP, so not feeling a lot of heat there. We're going to talk about the week that was for Poilievre, the porn headline, wading into change rooms and trans rights, his strong opposition to the proposed online harms legislation. What's the politics here? He doesn't choose to speak about every issue, but he is choosing to speak about these. And then the Pharmacare agreement has finally been reached. What's the fallout? What is it? What's it going to mean politically? And what does it mean for the supply and confidence agreement in the next year and a half? And then Gordon Pinsent will close it out with our Hey Yous. And aren't we lucky to have had Gordon Pinsent bless this show with his voice and character. All right, guys. So how are you?
Great.
I'm all right, but Kory looks better. Kory's looking very beachy this morning.
Yeah. Nicole's back from Nicaragua. I'm wearing my Nicaragua t-shirt she got me, and it's so sunny in Toronto today. I'm wearing my sunglasses because it's so bright.
Are you sure that's not the result of the Ontario poll numbers this morning?
Yeah.
So bright, you have to shield yourself.
I went to bed with a smile on my face last night after chatting with my friend Nick Cavalis about the numbers. So yeah, it was good.
Well, I chatted with Nick Cavalis about the numbers last week, and it did not bring a smile to my face.
That was a good episode. There's lots of nuggets in that thing. For those who have not listened, they should check it out.
Yeah, it was a great episode. I actually thought he might have been spinning me on the Ontario provincial numbers, but it turns out he wasn't, based on Coletto and Abacus today. That's a different matter. We can get to that some other time. All right, let's wade into this. Jordan, I didn't find out. Are you okay? You doing all right?
Yeah, I'm good. I had a really good weekend. I took my kids ice fishing with friends, and we had just had perfect weather yesterday. So since it's been this weird winter where we actually it still doesn't feel like we've had a proper season, it was nice to get out and do that.
Okay, so I've never been ice fishing. How long were you out there?
Well, little kids, so about 4 hours.
Okay, how many fish did you catch?
I would say we caught about 7 or 8. So we got some perch, and then we got some very lost pike. Nothing worth keeping, but yeah, it was fun.
Right. All right. Well, that's probably enough fish to keep it interesting.
Yes, I would say so.
You do need to be catching fish when you're fishing.
You do need to be catching. Well, and we went out with my buddy, and he's got the underwater camera. So that also adds a level of interest for everybody, because you can see what's happening, and you can see the fish just looking at your lure and not biting, which is, a familiar feel for New Democrats. So it was good.
I've got this vision of you in a hut on a lake, sucking back a old Milwaukee going, it doesn't get any better than this.
Well, to play to type, I bring craft beer, but yes, you're not totally off base.
All right, let's get to this Abacus poll, which is hot off the presses. Top line number, Conservative 41, down 2 from the last time margin of error change. Liberals 24%, no change. NDP 19% up 1, margin of error. So this is now stable in this range. It's a beating everywhere across the country. The Conservatives lead the Liberals by 21 points in British Columbia, by 105 points in the Prairies, by 16 points in Ontario, and by 20 points in Atlantic Canada. So people are talking about 60 some seats for the Liberals based on this kind of result. I'll tell you what I found. I'm interested in what you see in this data, but from my perspective, if I was working on the Liberal campaign, the thing that would really be scaring me right now is that there's no fear of Poilievre that is apparent in the numbers. There is no, so I look at things like, for instance, most people now think the Conservatives are going to win the election. Only 1 in 5 Canadians think the Liberals are going to win the election. Most people think the Conservatives are going to win the election. They're not recoiling from that. That isn't building any negatives about Poilievre or the Conservatives. The Poilievre's negatives are static and not high in the mid-30s. And so you're not seeing the kind of resistance to him. And the most telling point for me is this. And I said this to you guys on the WhatsApp chat this weekend, right? When Coletto asks people to choose in a forced choice between Poilievre and Trudeau, Poilievre wins by 10 points. Now, you may say, well, that just makes sense. He's ahead by 17 points in the polls. But no, it doesn't make sense. Because normally, given the fact that all the votes that are parked with the NDP, the Bloc, and the Green Party, that the Liberal leader should be winning that best prime minister over the Conservative leader by 15 or 20 points. And the fact that he's losing to Poilievre on that metric, meaning many Liberal voters and are not choosing Trudeau, and at least a third of NDP voters are not choosing Trudeau over Poilievre. It's amazing. And it is, for those people who thought that Poilievre was going to be an unacceptable alternative, for people that thought that Canadians were going to be revolted by Poilievre or repelled by Poilievre or scared by Poilievre, none of that appears to be occurring. So, I mean, and that is a precondition to winning again at this point in time, is that lots of people find the alternative to be unacceptable. Kory, what do you see?
Yeah, well, I see all those things as well, David. But what else I see is I don't think Poilievre is as high as he's going to go yet. Like when you look at where his voter ceiling is and the underlying numbers in terms of right track, wrong direction for the government, desire for a change in government, I think he can go a few points higher yet. I'm not quite as bullish as my friend Nick, who thinks he can get to 50, but I think he could get to 48. Like I don't think he's topped out yet, and I think that's really bad news, not just for the Liberals but the NDP, because I see more of those points coming off the NDP than I do off the Liberals.
Last time out in this space, you hurly-burlyites might remember I took you all for a metaphorical spin in a nearly now technology: self-driving vehicles. This week, we're talking about another industry quickly advancing into the autonomous space. AM is the shorthand for it. Autonomous mining, when you dig a little deeper. And yes, that will be the last of my mining puns for today. I hardly need to tell you how critical mining has always been to Canada's industrial success. But we all have the imagery in our heads, don't we? Miners descending into inhospitable environments, peril, an unwelcome part of the territory. Well, the entire industry is right on the cusp of a next-gen network revolution. With their superior coverage, ultra-low latency, and superior reliability, 5G and fiber networks will make it possible to automate so much of the old analog process, driving a myriad of remote operation possibilities. These are precisely the network technologies our presenting sponsor TELUS continues to invest billions in, with good reason. With more companies building battery plants in Canada, we need critical minerals to be mined as safely, efficiently, and productively as possible, with minimal impact on the environment. Here's an eye-opener. McKinsey estimates that by 2035, the age of smart mining will save mineral raw material producers between $290 and $390 billion annually. And as the world quickly approaches a future where industries in all sectors rely more and more on advanced networks to automate their work, Canada has a very real opportunity to position itself as a leader. But as I've been saying, the kind of multi-billion-dollar investments it takes to get us to that place only happen under regulatory conditions that continue to make it all make fiscal sense. More next week. Jordan, I mean, Liberals have to understand this is not looking like 2006 against Harper. This is looking like 1984 against Mulroney. This is what this looks like. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question, it's grim. And I think what really struck me was that this poll provides support for the idea that we've talked about a lot over the last year, which is that the efforts the Liberals have made so far to change tracks and to push back are ineffective. They are not landing. And I think that one of the most interesting kind of markers in this poll is Cleto did a little bit of a breakdown on issues and sort of, do you think the government has put enough focus on XYZ issue? And it's really interesting. So, I think folks would do well to go and take a look at it. But it's just damning. So he measured whether or not people think the government has put adequate focus on cost of living. That measure has gone up 5 points in a year. So 5% people more think the government is not doing enough, up to 75% of people surveyed. That is just brutal. You got 3/4 of the population who thinks you're not doing enough on one of the top 3 most important issues that people have. And that's despite everything that they've done.
The number one issue by a mile, let's be clear.
Yeah,
the number one
right.
issue by a mile.
Yeah, well, I mean, I should say also, like, their measurements on housing and healthcare are really not very much better either.
No.
So, but to me, this is something that if I were the Liberals and I were to pull one thing out of here that is really worrying, this would probably be it, because it suggests that the course corrections that they are taking on so far are not landing, they're not working, and in fact, they're continuing to lose ground on these really, really important ballot questions. And at the end of the day, like, they're now sitting with a voter universe under 40%. Like, this is a shrinking pool for the Liberals to fish in, and it's going very much the wrong direction for them, even though they have, to some degree, redirected their government's focus around messaging. It's just not sticking.
Yeah, well, they're not communicating it in a way that is effective, and there's no sword on the other side. So they're promoting the good things that they're doing, and the ministers are attacking. But it's not.
Well, I thought this paired well with the story out in the Star today, analyzing some online ad spending between the Liberals and the Conservatives. And there continues to appear to be a thinking on the part of the Liberals that they can wait to deliver paid negative messaging until the campaign starts. And
they don't have any fucking money, Jordan. Listen,
I was going to say, this is all suggesting that is absolutely a suicidal idea.
It struck me so much that I think I remember the exact quote. Senior Liberal officials on background so they could speak frankly, didn't think it would be effective now to attack Poilievre, right? They went on background so they could give that frank commentary about their plan right now. Jordan, to your point, let's just take the polling here for a second. The things so Coletto asked people on a range of issues, is the Trudeau government doing too much, about right, or not enough on these issues? The things where they seem to be doing too much or the right amount, let's say you could infer that they've got an edge over Poilievre on those issues. Climate change, Indigenous reconciliation, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, right? Then on the other side, here are the things that almost everybody thinks they're not doing enough on and presumably are losing badly to Poilievre. The cost of housing, the rising cost of living, problems with the healthcare system, and crime and public safety. So I take into the fight climate change, Indigenous reconciliation, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and I'm fighting against cost of living, healthcare, and housing.
Yeah, good fucking luck. You're going to need it.
No, fuck.
Yeah.
I honest to God don't see a way back. Kory, I don't.
Well, look, we've said this a bunch of times before, but I think so much of this is tied to Trudeau's unpopularity at a personal level. Like, I think the public has just closed their ears to anything he has to say. And I don't see a path back with him in a leadership position. Like, I think, you can come to that realization before the election and try to have a change there, or you can come to it after the election with, a whole lot fewer seats than you might have otherwise had. But like, I don't know what thread is in those numbers that you could pull on to do anything with at the moment. Like, the lead is astounding. The underlying numbers are even worse than what the lead is. I see them, going even lower. Is it possible that they could get as low as 20? Yeah, I think it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's already it's just a 6-point spread between the NDP and the Liberals should be very concerning for them. Like that's, they drop further.
Yeah, but I mentioned it earlier. Like I think there's as much here for the NDP to worry about. Like, you've talked in the past about, there being a progressive ballot. Well, who's winning a progressive ballot in a way sounds strange, but it's Poilievre. Like he's drawing from the NDP heavily. Like it's not like people are moving between the Liberals and the NDP. They're moving to the Conservatives on both sides. Like,
yeah, I do think it's a really interesting dynamic in this poll. Like if you the numbers are here. I think it's at best a mixed bag for Singh and the NDP, but the fact that they're still holding above their 2021 results, despite having like nearly 2 years of a pretty clear consensus that Poilievre is going to form the next government, and messages to progressives that Poilievre is scary and we don't want him. The fact that they're still holding there, I think, is really interesting, and I agree. It does suggest that the support that they're losing is really primarily going to the Conservatives, and I think that that's going to be their big challenge. Is they have to reorient themselves around fighting some of those battles for working class voters, in areas like Northern Ontario, in the Southwest, and those are going to be the fights to watch.
Well, so what's happening, Jordan? Do you think? I mean, I understand completely the dynamic of the Conservative NDP switchers among blue collar mill towns and things like that. But in the cities, so let's take, for example, let's look at the BC market, for example. Coletto says BC is 41 Conservative, 20 Liberal. So the Liberal votes collapsed in BC. NDP are at 27. Why are the NDP only at 27? David Eby's way above that. Yeah. Super popular, right? Why are the NDP not scooping up Liberal urban votes?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we're seeing in BC is that people who support the NDP government in BC and who vote BC NDP are very open to voting other ways federally, right? So you don't necessarily have that tight connection between the two parties as voters understand it there. I think also there's a degree of people watching and waiting to see what's going to happen. I think that, there's still a discomfort with Poilievre as an alternative. So we'll see where people settle. But yeah, I think that some of the same dynamics around those working class ridings exist in BC as they do in Ontario. You look at Northern Vancouver Island, you look in the interior of BC. These are ridings that have a lot of the same type of profile in terms of those potential swing voters than you do in some of those working class areas in Ontario. So I think the dynamic there is the same. And the NDP, they have a challenge out there. They need to make sure that they are speaking to some of those issues that get those voters engaged and pull them away from the Conservatives. And I'm not sure that they've been able to do that so far.
Yeah. Well, I'll state the obvious on this. It's a change election coming, and the NDP are supporting the government. Like, I think that it is probably the simplest and clearest explanation. Like, if you are part of the, essentially part of the government, seen as in league with the government, and it's a change election, why would people support them? Like, I just think, that's the simplest and probably the most straightforward answer, minus those voters that you were talking about that are more blue collar. And I think there's cultural issues and other things, but if you're talking, climate change and sort of urban woke issues, you're not going to be very attractive to a lot of those voters too. So sort of a combination of the two.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm a little less sold on that thesis yet. Like, I think as we get closer, that could be more of a dynamic, but I think it makes sense, Singh's negatives to be a little bit higher as he's exercising power and leverage. Not everybody likes that. That's polarizing, but it's really going to be also about how the party is able to tell the story of this agreement. Is it an agreement where they were propping up the government and carrying on unpopular liberal policies? Or is it an agreement where they were able to leverage their position to get stuff for people? And I know we're going to talk more about Pharmacare, so I don't want to scoop that conversation, but I think a lot of it is going to depend on how they message that and when they choose to break with the government.
So the Scotties just wrapped up. Those of you who know, there is no more Canadian contest anywhere. Anyway, the curling at that event is about as good as curling gets. Like any sport, it has its own glossary of terms: house, hogline, button, pebble, rushing, etc. You can look it all up. And of course, curl. A stone's curl is the amount its trajectory bends while traveling down the ice. An expert curler can perform a move called a hit and roll. Bear with me here, curling fans. I'm getting to the point. In a hit and roll, the curler curls a stone down the ice, aiming at a stone on the other end of the rink that has another stone, a guard, in front of it. Properly executed, a hit and roll curls around the guard stone, knocks out the targeted stone, and then tucks itself in behind the guard. Like I said, it's an expert move. There are curlers who say, let's just worry about hitting something, period. Get the basics down before trying any fancy stuff, in other words. And yes, here's where I get to the point. Our sponsor, CN, decided to get back to getting the basics down a few years back. As I've said here more than once, the railway initiated a prime directive. Trains leave the station on time and arrive on time every time, and safely. That's trickier than it sounds. Tracks have to be clear, weather has to be coped with, scheduling has to be precise, but it's working. CN trains are more punctual than they have been in years. Train velocity, the number of miles a train covers in an average day, is higher than it has been for years. Trains are spending less time in stations. CN customers are getting the cars they need when they need them, and their shipments are arriving on time. Come to think of it, that is actually sort of a hit and roll. The analogy might be a bit convoluted, but I like it. Well, let's just slide right into that. So, yeah, there is a deal on Pharmacare. Not much detail out yet. I saw the NDP get a significant couple of day lead on describing this program to Canadians over the government. Not sure how happy the government was to see Mr. Singh out there on Friday talking about this thing, but in any event,
got to dance with the one that brung you.
It sounds like it's some sort of legislation that provides for a framework for Pharmacare, but not actual Pharmacare, with the exception of two areas of drugs: contraception and diabetes, which is estimated to cost around $1 billion a year, $800 million. Freeland says it's within their fiscal framework. They can do it without expanding the deficit somehow. They can do that. I don't know whether provinces have to sign on or not sign on in order for this contraception and diabetes drug thing to happen. Probably they do. So Alberta and Quebec have already signaled that they're not going to sign on. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of provinces said they weren't going to sign on to the program. So I'm not ultimately sure what it means. It certainly means politically that I want to get this right now, the Supply and Confidence Agreement, SACA, continues. And clearly, I have to say, Jordan, looking at the substance of the deal, it is a deal that is driven in part by the NDP's desire to get a Pharmacare program, and in part by both sides' desire to keep this confidence and supply agreement going. Correct?
Yeah, and I would say also in part by a desire to set up a neat little wedge for the Conservatives. So I think maybe I would add that as a bit of a third leg to that stool. Yeah, I think, look, there is a really earnest component to this. The New Democrats were serious about wanting to make progress on this. This is the largest, along with the dental care, it's the largest expansion of Medicare since its inception. This is a really big win for them. And I think it's a big win, not just in material terms, because as this legislation goes through and as they negotiate with provinces, you are going to end up with more Canadians who currently have to pay out of pocket for these medications, getting them for free. And that's a good thing for our country. I think we can all agree on that. But I think that they, as we've talked about before, they turned an issue that doesn't necessarily have a lot of resonance with the public. Like, people weren't lining up clamoring for Pharmacare, but they've managed to take that and put it in, I think, a really communications first lens, which is something that was missing in some of these earlier conversations. So the choice of drugs that are going to be covered was really important. The fact that they're getting 2 specific classes of drugs included in this legislation rather than just a framework legislation, which was actually what was in the text of the supply and confidence agreement. So they can claim that, this is over and above what they agreed to. I think that's all to the good. And with respect to the provinces, look, this is not astonishing that Alberta would preemptively declare to opt out, and nor is it astonishing that Quebec would preemptively declare that they would like to opt out with compensation. Yes, please. But we've also heard BC and Manitoba are already indicating willingness to sign on. And, I think that the past has shown that even conservative provinces can come around on healthcare agreements. I mean, Ontario just signed one last week with the feds after.
What about the chaos going on in the childcare space, though, right now? Wouldn't that be a cautionary tale for provinces signing on to another Fed-Prov agreement?
Well, yeah, I mean, these programs have to be adequately funded, right? Like, that's you can't set up standards that are unattainable with the funding that is supplied for them. And I think that that's really one of the big issues with the childcare program right now. And we live it in our family, we use that program. And the reality is that the funding right now is not adequate to create the number of spaces with staff who are well paid enough to stay in those positions. And so you can legislate the best framework in the world, but if you don't fund it, it's not actually going to work for people. So that is something that obviously has to be a part of these conversations. And I think, I noted with some amusement that Freeland was scurried out very quickly this weekend from Poland to reassure those in caucus who care about these things that this was going to stay within an 800 million envelope. And I know who that message was for, but I actually think that that's helpful for the New Democrats, because that's putting a real dollar figure on this. That makes this real. This is something that there's money set aside from, and that is going to hopefully happen soon for people. So all in all, I think this was well played for the New Democrats, and now they have an opportunity to claim a good, solid win on Pharmacare, probably as good as they were going to get in this agreement, in this situation, and tee up some other demands leading into the budget that are more tied with issues like housing and affordability that are going to be a little bit more favorable for them. And then, as we've talked about before, they set up to the next squeeze on the government. This was just last week's squeeze. There will be another. And so that's going to be what they now have to do, is look to how they're going to land this ship and make sure that it's on terms that are favorable to them.
Well, I'm not sure the NDP can survive any more brilliant victories like they've had on dental care and other things. If this is such a great idea, and if this plan works so well, how come it's not being reflected in any of the polling? I think.
Where are the child care votes? Where are the dental care votes?
And I don't think they're going to be votes on going their way on this either. I think all of this stuff is too niche. It leaves out too much of the middle class. The reality is, most Canadians do have coverage for drugs, either through their employer or through existing provincial subsidies, et cetera. There's not a big problem that's being fixed. These are rhetorical wins for the NDP, but they're wins that don't seem to move votes in their direction. I think they'd be much better to be focused on some other issues around cost of living, as opposed to, or even, advocating that the government put more money into core healthcare services that are a lot more important to Canadians.
So, Kory, why can't they argue? Why can't they argue that this is a cost of living measure? Why can't they take childcare, dental care, Pharmacare, wrap it all up, and say, look at how much we're saving people?
Yeah, because they can't, because it's not broad-based enough. There are not enough Canadians that qualify for those programs. They're too targeted. They're too niche. And, which is why I think Poilievre is cleaning, both the Liberals and the NDP's clock on this stuff. because a carbon tax does touch everybody. And if you say I'm going to get rid of that people see a direct line between their economic situation and that change in policy. And far too few Canadians see a similar benefit for them in these niche targeted programs. So right now I only see one party and one politician at the federal level who's playing to the masses, to the large middle class of the country, and that's Poilievre.
Today's podcast sponsor, Bruce Power, knows a thing or two about big projects. The company is undergoing a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar refurbishment program, which is Canada's largest private sector infrastructure project and will secure a reliable supply of carbon-free nuclear power for Ontario to at least 2064. Bruce Power is refurbishing 6 of its 8 generating units through its major component replacement project, which involves replacing all of the reactor internal parts, pipework, and large reactor components. Think replacing 320,000-pound steam generators using one of the world's largest cranes. Unit 6 was the first to undergo refurbishment, which began in January 2020 and was declared commercially operational last September, 39 years to the day of its first in-service date in 1984. What was not by chance was the fact that the project was completed successfully and with an industry-best safety rating for large projects. And thanks to the efforts of its employees, industry partners, and thousands of skilled tradespeople, the refurbishment was completed ahead of schedule and on budget. Unit 6 alone provides enough clean electricity to power more than 900,000 homes, and each renewed unit will be operational for more than 40 years, a period in which the independent electricity system operator forecasts the need for clean energy to more than double. Big projects also mean jobs, a lot of them. Bruce Power secures an estimated 22,000 jobs directly and indirectly from operations and an additional 5,000 jobs annually through its investment program. And with over 90% of the company's spend staying within Canada, supporting hundreds of businesses, the Made in Canada project helps power the economy. So Jordan, it raises an interesting question for me, which is Singh and the federal NDP ideologically unprepared to offer Canadians tax relief? Because New Democrats at the provincial level right now are offering Canadians tax relief as opposed to programming supports. And I haven't heard anything like that out of the NDP, broad-based tax relief, such as the carbon tax or something else. Gas taxes is what people are doing at the provincial level. Why aren't they going there, and might they go there?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I don't think that they're allergic to that. And I would expect to see things like that included in their platform as they get closer to the election. I mean, there's no mystery. That stuff, it works. It's very effective. You see it in Manitoba. You see it, to some degree in BC as well. These are measures that work with people, and they also help inoculate against some of the big spending concerns that voters can sometimes have about New Democrats. And Singh and his team are very alert to what is happening in other provinces and what seems to be working. And so, and I know, of course, Singh's chief of staff, Jennifer Howard, came up through Manitoba politics, knows this stuff very well, and is absolutely alive to the potential of that. So I think I don't think they're allergic to it at all. But I think that what they're doing here, they and I don't buy entirely what Kory is saying, because I think, as we've talked about before, these commitments, like on dental care and pharmacare, it's not strictly transactional with voters. It's not, oh yes, you gave me a dental care program, yes, I'm going to vote for you. Part of this is also for the NDP about overcoming some of the perceptions around competence and ability to govern that have hampered them, particularly at the federal level.
So they've thrown their lot in with this crew.
Well, they are getting things to help people out of this crew that quite plainly have to be dragged out of this government and would not happen if they weren't there. And I don't think that that's at all a bad place to be. And I actually think that the way that the Pharmacare deal landed, with the 2 specific classes of drugs being covered, which, by the way, do touch a lot of Canadians. Very smart to include contraception. That's an issue. And I can guarantee
I'd have included Ozempic if I were them.
Well, yes. I think for certain demographics, that's going to be a biggie for sure. But look, this is something
more Ozempic. You might need more birth control as well. I don't know. It could be actually a
That's
whole lot
where
of
the cost spiral starts.
Yeah. I was going to say, you got to keep dream
the
big.
whole thing together.
Yeah. Right.
But I think that that's a smart choice, right? Like every woman in Canada who uses birth control can tell you a story of a time in their life when they were not covered and when they did have to pay out of pocket for this stuff. And so I really disagree with the idea that these are too narrow to touch people. I do think it touches people. I think that, for example, even on dental care, if some families are making too much money currently, perhaps to qualify for it, but maybe their senior parents qualify for it and who are on a fixed income, and that's making a big difference for them. So some of this is about making sure that within these agreements with a government that clearly does not really want to do any more big program spending, that's having some regret around that they're dragging things out that actually are tangible, that people have in hand, that they can relate to. And I think that they've managed to turn some of these big programs into those specific concrete things that they can go out and talk about in a relatable way. And actually, by the way, I should say this is something that the Liberals themselves have completely failed to do over the tenure of their government. And the NDP in the space of this 2-year agreement has managed to stay more focused on some of the communications-friendly outcomes of these large programs than the government has since they've taken office in 2015.
So what you're saying is with this Pharmacare plan, with the Liberals and the NDP, you're fucked.
I mean, only consensually.
Look, I'm just curious, though. If the NDP used the leverage that they have with their confidence and supply agreement and focused it instead on Pharmacare, on getting rid of the carbon tax and replacing it with something else, if they wouldn't be miles and miles further ahead. I think it would help stop the bleeding that they're having to the Conservatives. I think it would broaden their reach to more of the middle class. And it's something that's more important to Canadians. Like, at the end of the day, it's always been an unlikely thing in my mind to be pushing for Pharmacare. Like, the support levels for it compared to other things that you could be doing it's just not high enough. Like, there's
actually a tangible example, Kory. There's a tangible example, and I'm quite familiar with it, which is, listen, I am immensely proud of the policy agenda that Kathleen Wynne pursued when she was the Premier of Ontario. But it included many of these things. It included a targeted Pharmacare program. It included all-day kindergarten, junior kindergarten, and it included childcare stuff, and it included a lot of programming like this. And I was proud of those initiatives as policy, but there was no votes in them.
Yeah.
Right? There were no votes in them, and partly the problem is, let's be blunt, when you are targeting low-income people, they're less likely to pay attention to news and know what's going on, and they're less likely to vote. And so, the people who are sure to vote don't benefit from these things, and the people that may or may not vote do benefit from these things. And so you've got an additional political problem about it. I mean, I don't think it's harmful politically, Jordan, but I don't see it as a springboard.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I don't think it's in and of itself a springboard. It's not a silver bullet. It's going to matter enormously how this is communicated to the voters that saying the NDP need to reach. But I also think that, and I'm sure we would all agree on this, we're living in a time of really sort of enshittified politics, like politics that is divided and depressing and dark and really designed to turn the average voter off. And so there is a not insignificant, very earnest part of me that is just so fucking happy that something good has gone on here. That's something that, yes, it's incrementalist. And yes, maybe it won't last. Maybe, all of those things are very true. But at the end of the day, this is really the art of the possible within government. And I think that it's a positive thing for Canadians to see this. And I think it's particularly a positive thing in the environment that we're in right now. The challenge is now for the New Democrats that they need to sell this in an electorally favorable way, and that's the challenge that's before them. But I think that they did a good thing here for the country, and that's not nothing.
All right. Kory, do you got anything last thing to say about this confidence in supply agreement carrying on?
Well, if it keeps going this well, there's going to be two parties that suffer very badly in the next election. So, keep it going, I guess. As a conservative on the panel, I think it's working great for Poilievre. Not a lot of evidence that it's working for the NDP. In fact, none that I can see.
Hey, David Coletto, suggestion. Interesting thing for me would be to know what, at this point, people see the differences between the Liberal Party and the NDP to be. Are these things merging into one entity in people's minds, or are they still two distinct entities with different approaches? I'd be quite interested to see.
Well, and I think some interesting stuff on Best PM there to tease out.
We have been hearing from our original sponsor, the Ontario Real Estate Association, about solutions to address the housing affordability crisis and build 1.5 million new homes. OREA's latest research offers 10 key actions to increase housing supply, from purpose-built rentals to new homes, so that more families can achieve the dream of home ownership. Actions include ending exclusionary zoning, converting vacant commercial space to residential housing, and allowing water and wastewater to be provided through a municipal services corporation. These bold ideas will make meaningful progress to build more homes. On top of these policies, we need political courage. Queen's Park needs to act with urgency and put their foot on the gas to reach the housing targets. More can and must be done to give people in Ontario the homes they need today and in the future. Remember, bold action builds homes. Read OREA's report on how Ontario can end the housing crisis at orea.com/advocacy/housing-supply. Okay. Our next topic is issues I'm very uncomfortable with. Let's call it this. Let's just put a headline on this. Issues David Herle is uncomfortable talking about. And that is, what was Pierre Poilievre doing last week? So he's extremely judicious. I wouldn't say he doesn't say anything about policy. He's put out policies in areas where he wants to. And in areas where he doesn't want to, he hasn't put out policy. So it's far from an open book what a Poilievre government would be. So when he decides to take an issue on, I think it's of some significance. And he did stake out some very clear positions last week. He said he was in favor of some sort of age restriction on accessing pornography. As somebody that used to get caught leafing through things in the magazine stand of the local drugstore, I have no comment on this issue. He said that he opposed the government's proposed Online Harms Act, which he hadn't seen, but opposes, I guess, conceptually and in principle. And he said that he had a position on transgender, in that biological males should not be in female washrooms and biological males should not participate in women's sports. So these things don't appear on Coletto's list of important issues either. And I'm wondering why he feels the need to stake out, and they're kind of conflicting positions. Like the position on accessing porn seems a little inconsistent with the position on online harms. And one of them seems libertarian, and one of them seems perhaps more traditionally small c conservative to me. So I think it's all interesting. So Kory, maybe you could demystify for us why Poilievre felt he wanted to wade into these issues and what message he's sending by doing so.
Well, I think they're not huge priorities as part of what my take was in this. These are issues that you're going to get questions on because of, things that are either moving through Parliament or that are big stories in the media, and things where other levels of government are doing things. So, the trans issue, you've got Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and Alberta moving on these things, and so the question's going to come up. And I think you're better to have an answer than not have an answer. But I also think you're better to not talk about it very much. But insofar as there are two sides on this, and I enjoyed your conversation with Nick Cavellis around this stuff. You've got multiple parties splitting up, a divided public, and you got one party with basically half the public. So I don't think it's a highly controversial statement to say that biological men shouldn't be playing women's sports. Like if you were to take the other position, it'd be difficult to see very many female athletes or female sports existing because of just the difference in physicality between the two genders. There's a reason why things are divided that way at the Olympics and professional sports and amateur sports, etc. So, I don't think that's a highly controversial statement. I just also don't think it's a terribly relevant topic to be talking about at all in the environment that we're in with cost of living issues and all the rest. So I don't think there's a big downside for them. I would disagree a little bit about the trans issue being a SOCON issue. You can find all kinds of people who are, millennials and people from the more traditional left who have similar issues around that stuff. So I think it's more complicated than that. But I don't think I characterized trans as a SOCON issue. Okay.
No, I was saying that I thought that the position on pornography was a typically small C conservative position to take, whereas the position on online harms seemed more like a libertarian position to take, and maybe more of a PPC focused intervention.
Yeah, and they've talked about, the conservatives have talked about this stuff before. I do think the conservative, and we've talked about this before, I do think the Conservative Party today is more libertarian than it is socially conservative. At least their last convention was, markedly so. Basically all the SOCON stuff got voted down. Right. And and they ended up with a resolution on body autonomy, which sounds like decriminalizing drugs in the morning after pill. So I think it's sort of like going in the opposite direction on that. Yeah, I just don't think they're huge issues, and I think it would be a mistake for the conservatives to spend much time on them. So but they are going to come up for the reasons I mentioned. So you got to have an answer. But I think there's too much being read into it.
You know what, Jordan? I have polling on online harms. And I know that Poilievre is way off of public opinion on this, and way off of most conservative voters on this. People in Canada largely believe that there's terrible stuff happening online, especially to kids, and that there's a role for government to regulate it and even criminalize it where necessary. I don't suspect this is going to rise to the level of a vote-determining issue. But this is an example, I think, of where Poilievre, gets away with messaging to that PPC crowd out there to hold their numbers down at 2 or 3%, and maybe gets away with something that most people would disagree with him on.
Yeah, I actually, in contrast to Kory, I thought last week was super fascinating in terms of conservative strategy, and I think a couple different things to take away from it, and maybe to go first on the online harms and the porn issue, because I think there were a couple things happening there, and maybe one was a bit inadvertent, and one was more planned. So the position on the online harms stuff, obviously that was the planned component, and yes, I agree with you. I think it's not a great position to be stringently opposed to legislation that would go after criminal activity online that's targeting kids. And I say specifically that last part because the government seems to be doing a much tighter job this time around of messaging the bill around harms to kids. And we're talking about stuff like, I'm sure you guys remember the Amanda Todd case many years ago. So non-consensual dissemination of nudes and things like that. This stuff is sadly very tragic, also very relatable, and is happening to a lot of families. And so I think it's not necessarily a wise position on Poilievre's part to come out whole hog against it, particularly prior to seeing it. and without really having seeded the ground for any kind of opposition like that. I think it speaks to a much more niche libertarian base and not so much to the concerns of mainstream Canadians on this stuff. But I thought that it was really interesting because the headline around the porn stuff was really generated from an extremely short back and forth, right, in the Q&A last Wednesday, where he was asked effectively, do you support ID for accessing porn? He just said yes. And so from that was generated a pretty hot headline that the Conservatives were at pains to walk back online all day. You could just see them scrambling. And boy, if the same amount of my base was men, particularly middle-aged men, I too would be scrambling to correct that. And I think it's really interesting because, reaching back in time to the debates, you guys will probably remember over C-51 and things like that. You'll recall that one of the biggest concerns that actually ended up mobilizing people around that was not just civil liberties stuff, but it was also concern that the government was going to access your browsing history. Turns out that men really didn't like that very much. So the fact that and this bill coming from the Senate right now, they're New Democrats voted for it, Liberals voted for it. I think it's a piece of legislation that's likely going to in some form pass, but for the Conservatives to be going out there and saying, this is our position, but we actually don't support any concrete measure to verify ID. We don't want, we don't want facial recognition. We don't want any online ID. It's going to be kind of a fun square to watch them circle.
But honestly, Jordan, isn't it a reasonable question to say that at the time of my life when I most wanted porn, it was illegal for me to buy it?
Sure.
Right? When I was 14 years old, it was illegal for me to buy porn. Right? Yeah. I couldn't even see what they called porn in Playboy when I was 14 years old. And now you can see the most graphic acts ever conceived of.
That's
when
right.
You're 14 years old.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Is that okay?
It's 100% an issue, but it's also 100% an issue that the government is not adequately legislating illegal bad things online. So the Conservatives have a bit of an incongruity in their positioning that I think they're going to have to work out. And I do think that this issue on the porn access, like there was a certain amount of glee among Conservative opponents last week in grabbing this issue and running with it. I think just because of how unpopular that position actually would be among their base. I'm not really speaking to the policy merits of either one of these things at this point, but just to that division. But on the trans piece, so I thought this was the most significant and interesting development last week, simply because it was clearly so intentional on the part of Poilievre to come out and lay down a position on this, on an issue that 6 months ago at the Conservative convention, he could not stay far enough away from it. But last week, that question that was teed up, and that was not an off the cuff series of remarks he made. He made some very, very specific comments that touched on a number of dog whistles within that debate. The idea that trans people are in the wrong washroom, all of that stuff. Like this is this is part of a package of transphobic narratives that we have seen before. And he was like dinging on every single one. So this was about sending a message to what I can only assume is a certain group of voters in his base. And my thoughts on strategically why he did it last week, I don't think it was because he suddenly got a pointed question. I don't think it was because, there was anything like that. I think there was a desire for him to get out on it. And I think that the Conservatives wanted to do it early so as not to dwell on it. Because I think that the people around Poilievre generally understand that this is not a favorable issue for them to be spending time on. And yet they were getting pressure internally to stake out. In
a way that Harper did in 2006 with same-sex marriage. Just said off the top, I'm opposed to it, blah, blah, blah. We'll have a free vote, right? Don't ask me about this again for the rest of the campaign.
But I actually want to draw some contrast with that, because I think what he did was not, and again, I'm to be very clear, in complete disagreement with both of those positions. But I think what Poilievre did was not as strategically clean as what Harper did there, because the problem with Poilievre on this topic is the visible glee, the visible enjoyment he gets out of punching down on this group of people. And the problem and the risk with this is not just that it takes the Conservatives off the messaging that works for them on economy, on cost of living, on housing, all the stuff that has gotten them to their 17-point lead, but it's also that it runs contrary to a fucking $3 million ad campaign that they just rolled out over the summer that's also working really well for them to soften his edges among women and to convince people that this guy's got some warm and fuzzies in him. But when he comes out and he does stuff like this, it runs absolutely counter to that. So I think it was bad. I think it was off message. I don't know what the internal pressures were that led to it, but I think it was a mistake. And then, of course, also normalizing this rhetoric, it puts trans people at risk. There's no question, and I think that's really shitty. So I thought it was both interesting and also not particularly well played on their part last week.
AI is the talk of the town, with implications stretching beyond simple tasks like adding chatbots to draw a picture of David Herle with a six-pack. Its rapid development and potential opportunities are significant for everyone. What we might not realize is that the sudden emergence of AI owes much to years of pioneering work in Canada. Yoshua Bengio at the Université de Montréal and Geoffrey Hinton at the University of Toronto have been pivotal, so much so that they are known as the godfathers of AI. Their research on artificial neural networks and deep learning sparked AI's capacity to mimic human learning and creativity. Canada is now positioned as a world leader in AI, including its responsible development, with globally competitive clusters emerging from these labs. Investing now can power the economy tomorrow. That's why U15 Canada is a proud member of the Coalition for Canadian Research. The Coalition is urging the federal government to support science and talented Canadian researchers with new funding in this budget. We have to support Canadian ambition, full stop. Visit researchcoalition.ca to learn more. But Kory, if you could just hold on for a second, because I want to go back at Jordan on something about this, because I don't know. Because I can't find a consistent ideological or intellectual through line between Poilievre's positions, but I do believe that everything he said on every one of those issues, is the common sense average Canadian response to that issue. And so I think more than what the Liberals or New Democrats said on the other side, Poilievre would have had heads nodding at everything that he said.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about particularly on the online harms piece. I agree. But on the trans and on the porn, I think that's kind of, as Kory says, I mean, men competing with women doesn't make sense to people. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think that we've seen different measurements of what the Canadian...
Why we're fucking talking about it is another matter altogether. I mean...
Yeah, and look, are there people who are uncomfortable or unfamiliar with the notion of somebody being transgendered? Absolutely. Is that a large swath of the Canadian population? Yeah, I think it probably is. But is that the same as saying that Canadians want their politicians to enact policies that remove rights from people for what is effectively a private personal decision? And that I'm less persuaded of. I think that there's a reason, for example, that we don't see Doug Ford going out and blasting on this topic, right? I think that there's a reason that this issue has not gained traction in Quebec. I think that by and large that there is a small group of voters who are very activated around the issue of concern about transgender people, but that for a lot of Canadians, when politicians deep dive into this issue and spend a lot of time either scaremongering or, in the case of Danielle Smith, developing elaborate policies to remove rights from these folks, what it really communicates is that you are more interested in your weird internal policy debates around these issues than you are about the issues that actually impact people on their day-to-day lives. So, well, maybe some of those concerns meet the nod test because those are concerns that people have heard echoed other places. I don't think as an issue for the Conservatives to champion and for him to take a really strong negative stance on, I still don't think it's really good. I don't think it plays into the strengths that have got them where they are.
Kory, I got to think, though, I mean, the Liberals seem to delight when Poilievre does this. It gets under their skin. They want to rush to the barricades and fight these fights and feel morally superior as they do so. But I said earlier, I can't see a way back for the Liberals, but I'm fucking certain it doesn't lie through issues like this.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think for most Canadians, I agree with you, David, that Poilievre has more heads nodding than the Liberals do on this stuff. But I think where the government and frankly the NDP have really missed the mark is on relevancy of the topics they're choosing to talk about. And how much do you want to talk about climate change? Well, Canadians are concerned about it. Like 80% of Canadians have some level of concern about climate change, but not compared to whether or not they can pay their mortgage. Like, when there is a hierarchy of these things, and is it terrible to say? I just don't give a fuck about this stuff. And I actually think that is the majority position. Maybe I should be more concerned about it. But to be honest, it is of such marginal relevancy, I think, or not even marginal, like of zero relevancy to most people. And I don't think that people are out there harboring ill will towards trans people. Love and joy to everybody. But also, can we talk about something that has a more tangible effect on people's lives? I think the online harm stuff is, a real issue. I do think there's a lot more traction around parental concern about stuff that's going on online, and pornography is part of that. And I think age verification, if there's some way that you can do that it isn't, then I think people would probably be in favor of that. I would be in favor of that, but I'm not sure there's a way to do it, to be honest, that it isn't going to be end run by the 14-year-old who wants to look at pornography anyway. But I do think there are issues around social media platforms, around the sort of addictive nature of some of these products. Like I think social media is more addictive than smoking. Like I think that the issues around that are huge, and I think the potential harms to kids are huge. And I think there's a lot there for policymakers to talk about and have serious conversations about. I don't really see us having them though. That's not really what I'm seeing. This
isn't a case of old people being concerned about young people. This is
I think young people
themselves.
Yeah, these young people themselves
tell me in the polling that they regularly encounter information they consider to be dangerous or harmful.
That's
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
these are hugely important policy discussions.
Well, you have non-transparent algorithms and things like, if your kid is having, suicidal thoughts, you don't want YouTube feeding them a bunch of stuff on how to kill yourself, right? Like there's, there are real issues there, and I think they warrant further discussion. But the trans stuff, I just I don't know. Where do I think the public is? Where do I think the politics is? Talk about things that affect more people. And, and I don't see any path to a better place than they are right now for either the NDP or the Liberals by dwelling on this shit. I think it makes it worse for them, not better.
Totally. If you're the Liberals, add up the number of days left in your mandate and ask yourself how many of them you want to spend talking about this. Right? Because it gets you nowhere. All right. I think despite the absence of Reid, and boy, we sure could have used him for the porn conversation. We were lacking. Lacking the expertise. We were lacking the expertise that would have been required for a fulsome conversation about that. But in any event, we did our best. It's time for our Hey Yous.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go first because mine is linked to our last topic of discussion. So my Hey You is going out to the conservatives who are interested in trying to quickly placate the social conservatives with some of this stuff on trans issues, and they're just going to get it done and then move on to other topics. My Hey You is to take 10 minutes out of your time and go listen to the first trans conservative candidate, a former conservative now, who ran for you guys last election, named Hannah Hodson. She did a really interesting interview with Vashti on Power Play last Wednesday. Go take a few minutes and listen to it, because I think she articulated something really important, which is that the notion that you can court these hard populist, very socially conservative people ahead of elections. You can take their volunteer effort, you can take their donations, and then you can ignore them come policy time. That notion is wrong. And these folks are increasingly driving the bus, and it is to the broad detriment of your party. And you only need to look south to the Republican Party to see some of the worst manifestations of this, to look at what's happening to Danielle Smith with Take Back Alberta, to see it closer to home. So federal conservatives, if you think that this cannot happen to you, I would implore you to listen to some of your formerly own and think otherwise about this, because you have to pay the piper, and it's important to consider what that cost might be.
All right. Thank you, Jordan. Liberals don't know what it's like to have a flank that has to be appeased. Right. Anyway, Kory, what's your Hey You?
Well, I want to do one to the Ontario Liberal Party members out there, just using this as an excuse to talk about the other Coletto poll.
Oh, yeah, we never got to that.
As dire and terrible as we can all agree on this podcast things are for the Trudeau government, I found it very interesting to note that Justin Trudeau is stuck in the shittiest position in the polls you could ever imagine a political leader being, is 1 point higher than Bonnie Crombie is in the province of Ontario. As bad as it is for the long in the tooth, beyond redemption federal Liberal government, it's worse for the Ontario Liberal Party, and that's with a new leader and supposedly some leadership bounce around that. But it's dark days. 14-point lead for Doug Ford. 1 point behind Trudeau's levels of support in the province for Bonnie Crombie. Sad days. So I don't know. There you go.
Nothing I can say in response to that. But Jenny would want me to point out that Poilievre's doing better than Ford in Ontario.
Yeah, like 4 points or 3 points. Yeah, 44 to 41.
Okay, my Hey You goes out to the Liberal strategists who took anonymity so that they could discuss, frankly, the strategic considerations behind going after Poilievre. I would be so desperate to hear what you would say on the record, if you needed to take anonymity to make that fucking claim. Listen, Liberals, the bottom line is that Poilievre as Prime Minister is getting baked in, and it's acceptable, it's normalized. There's not much resistance to it. You bought yourself a year and a bit, and at the end of that time, if he's not unacceptable to about 60% of the population, you're going to lose, and bad. So this is the task. And it won't be done on identity politics. It has to be done on things that will actually hurt individuals. And you got to find the wedge. You got to create a wedge. You got to find it. You got to drive it. But it's all about Poilievre's negatives. There is no chance, no matter what you think you're doing well, no chance you will win if people think he's okay. There you go. Hey, you. I would like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsor, CN Rail, Bruce Power, Aurea, and U15 Canada. All of their great support for our little show here allows us to put this thing on. I want to thank Kory and Jordan for being here. A great conversation in the absence of Reid, and thank all of you for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week with more of the Curse of Politics. In the meantime, take care of yourselves.